track we've been building, which is core ideas, life-building ideas that the Torah presents to us, and we can take and build and run with and grow with. So I want to start with an interesting little story that is brought down in the Talmud, and it says like this. Opens up by saying that everything was created, everything that was created with da'at, with some type of knowledge or ability to relate, with a komatam and sivyonam, meaning that everything that was created had some level of decision making in what it was. So let's see what they're talking about. So the Talmud continues and talks about the story of the grass and says the following. God first turns to the trees, fruit trees, and he tells them, come into creation, each of you as per your specific design. Right? He tells them, come into creation, liminehu, each one in your own individual way. And he tells the trees, you should come into being, come into existence, where you have your fruit bearing, but you can also be eaten. Eitz piri oseh piri. So, God turns to the trees. Again, we're building on the idea that everything that was created, even though it didn't exist yet, had some say in what it would become. A little bit wild. How can you say that something that doesn't exist yet has a say in what it'll be? I don't know, talk about it. But the Talmud tells us that the trees and the horses and the flowers and the human being and everything else that was created by God had the ability to help define what it would be. And again, the story continues on how the trees were asked to come into being, where they would be fruit-giving and they themselves would be edible. Good? Who knows an edible tree? Edible tree. Tree. The etrog tree is edible. You break off the bark and you eat it?
And sugar?
Not really, huh?
Sugar cane?
Can you eat the tree? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not familiar with any trees where you can actually eat the tree. Maybe there are one or two. But generally speaking, whereas God commanded or mandated or asked the trees to come into existence so that they would be edible and fruit-bearing, the trees decide, for their own protection maybe, that they're not going to be edible, but they will be fruit-bearing. The trees decide that if they're edible, the animals are going to eat them and destroy them, and they won't have any longevity. They won't have any ability to create themselves again. So the trees decide on their own that they're going to be fruit-bearing, but they're not going to be edible. Okay. Now, the story says that the grass, when God turns to the grass and tells the grass, come into being, he doesn't tell the grass to speciate, to distinguish itself. He doesn't order the grass to have different types of grass. But the grass looks at the trees, according to the story, and says, well, they decided, and they became very specific in defining themselves and their individuality, those trees. We're going to do the same. And when the grass comes into being, The grass, although it was not mandated by God to be anything but absolutely one, absolutely indistinguished, it distinguishes itself based on its own decision and ends up coming up as several different types of grasses. Pretty great. And then the story says that what's God's reaction to this? He says, Yehi chivod Hashem le'olam, yismach Hashem b'ma'asav. God realizes the great respect and regard in His creation, in His universe. God is happy with His creator, with that He created. Pretty remarkable. Wait a minute. What you created didn't listen to you. You told the trees one thing. They decided on their own something else. You didn't specify with the grass, and they went ahead and they did what they wanted. How was that? A, how did they do it? And B, how is it that you were happy with it? How could you be happy with it? So it goes back to the top line, which is that somehow, in this extraordinary scheme of things called creation, what was created already had da'at. It already had the ability to relate, to acknowledge, and to choose. And therefore, it chose. And therefore, God celebrated the choices. Okay, so far? Now, if we go by this, when we review the verse that talks about how man was created, it says that God created man in His image to His likeness. Right? We're all familiar with this verse. And the way we typically explain it is that God created man to be a lot like Him. But if you go by this piece of the Gemara, you would learn it differently. You'd say, no, God created man, and man decided what he wanted to be. His dmut, his image, and man's likeness. Meaning, God inherently gave everything He created the capacity to create itself. Now, then you have one other round of conversation. I mean, there's thousands of rounds of conversation on this. But one other round of conversation, which is very interesting, which says that if you look at the first chapter of Bereshit, of the book of Genesis, and the second chapter, you see that things seemingly were created twice. We talk about the plant kingdom being created, and then again. The animal kingdom, and then again. Man, and then again. Hard to understand what's happening. And our rabbis answer in a very exciting way in the same piece of the Talmud and say that it could have been one of two possibilities. One possibility is that everything partners with God, defines itself, and gets ready and all set up to be created until man comes on the planet. Man connects to God, shows that the big system is going to work, and then pulls everything with him. So the grass was all ready to go, individualized, right under the ground. Man comes on the scene, prays to God, engages, has da'at, creates a relationship, and the grass breaks through. The trees the same. The fish the same. The animal kingdom the same. So what do we see from here? We see a couple of very interesting things that we can build on in our lives and that are essential to build on. A, there is this thing called da'at, relationship, connection, that God inherently, fundamentally infused into the creative process and that though to the point where the things that were going to be created, even though they didn't physically exist yet, in whatever reality they existed, they could make decisions and choices. Yeah? All right? Maybe? Let's see. And when they did make choices, even if those choices were a little different than God wanted, God applauds the fact and celebrates and sings in joy for the fact that they made choices. And then the caveat to it all, who's the one that pulls all the pieces of creation together? The one who pulls all the pieces of creation together is the human being. So all of these things that help define themselves and help design themselves and help create themselves are all perched right below the surface, so to speak, waiting to come onto existence. And who brings them on? Man. When man comes on the scene, reaches out to God, establishes a relationship between the physical and the absolutely unphysical, and demonstrates that that could be, because who would imagine that you could have a relationship between something physical and limited and something absolutely unequivocally as anti-physical as possible? When man stands up and reaches out and nails it and says, we are going to connect forever, God, you and me, then everything springs into life. Okay, so far? Sounds a little out there, but it's important to have it as a little framework for us to start. Okay. Now, building on that, we have a couple of core concepts. One concept is the concept of bechira, of choice. What does choice mean? Choice means that logic and habit and instinct would say I should go this way, and I decide to go this way. And the classic example of that is that a human being has the unique capacity to run towards a fire. Any instinctual being, like a cat, a dog, a gorilla, or whatever, when that entity sees danger, it's instinctually, habitually conditioned to run away from it. The human being has this unique capacity to make the choice, rather than the decision, to make the choice which we make with the capacity beyond reason and rationale, to make the choice to run towards the fire. Because he or she knows that there's somebody in that house who must be saved, whose life might be in danger. So that choice that was built into creation, where everything had the ability to self-mold and help create itself, goes to the extreme with the human being, where we can choose anything we want and do anything we want. Good? So, we're trained to do one thing. We're conditioned to do one thing. Everybody around us is doing one thing, but we can turn around and do the exact opposite. That's our unique endowment. And that, our rabbis say, is the difference between a choice and a decision. A decision is instinct, habit, mechanical. A choice is my higher intellect, my greater intellect, my heart, my gut, and that's what makes us unique. That's what allows us to fall in love. That's what allows us to dream. That's what allows us to have great vision and possibility in our lives. Okay, so far? Everything out of choice? We have the ultimate choice. Next step. We have this other core concept called hashgacha pratit. divine providence, which means that God has a relationship with every single being on the planet. Now, Maimonides, Rambam, qualifies that, and at the time when he said it, it was shocking to the Jewish world. He says, this idea of hashgacha pratit, of divine providence, it's not democratic. It's not the same for everybody. Different people get different connectedness to God. What? What do you mean? One person is living here, and one person is living here, and this person is more connected than this one? How could that be? What do you mean? Brother and sister, husband and wife. What do you mean? One has more connection, meaning one has more protection. One is less subject to the randomness of the universe, to chaos, than the other. One is essentially more protected. The answer is yes, according to Rambam, Maimonides. The answer is yes. Shock. What do you mean? What do I do? And Maimonides makes a very simple, serious point, and he says, God responds to people who are making serious choices. Going back to the last point. So someone who is mechanically following what everybody else is doing, or just letting life drag them forward, but who lacks the courage to make choices, to fall in love, to dream, to have great ambition, whether it be career, love and relationships, learning Torah, giving to others. Each of these things should be framed by great ambition, huge dreams. So Harambam says that the people who dream big get God's attention and His help, and are less subject to the chaos of the world around us. Whereas the people who are mechanical, who don't have the courage to make these choices, but are always just following along and making decisions, well, God says, what's the point? There's nothing doing here. So we're going to pause over here, because I want to make sure we got it. Let's reconnect. Point number 1 was?
Choices.
Huh?
Make choices, not decisions.
But point number 1 about creation. What was the first point about creation? Who can fill in here? First point about creation, yes.
Trees.
Huh?
The trees. The trees.
Uh-huh.
Instead of God said that you should be able to eat the bark as well as the fruits, and the trees made the decision to only have the food, because the fruits
Edible, and not them.
Right, because otherwise the animals will eat them, and then
Beautiful. So what does that demonstrate to you?
Making this, they had a higher intellect when they were able to make the decision on their own.
Great. Step 2 was what? Who made the next choice? Huh? Perfect. Arena, the grass. What did they decide?
Trees.
Huh?
They're gonna
Speciate. They're going to differentiate. There's going to be a zillion different types of grass. Why did they make that decision? Because they said, if the trees are doing that, we certainly need to do that. Good. And what's God's reaction? Huh? What does God say?
He was happy with their choice
He's thrilled. Why?
because he wanted them to make
Because He
the
wants creation to be alive and vibrant and dynamic on every level. Good? Good. Step 2. Who is the ultimate level of creation is who?
human being.
Us. Good. And what can we do uniquely? What can we do? Choices. Fabulous. We can make choices. We're not stuck with decisions. We're making choices. Great. Good. Now, next step. To the extent that someone makes choices, the more a person steps out and is willing to look and see and dream and learn and grow and make choices, what happens with that person? What does he merit? Excellent, divine providence. So the more I'm out there, the more courageous I am, the more determined I am to grow, the more I engage God. Which means that some people are much more subject to the randomness of the world than others. Some people are just going to get pulled along with the laws of nature. And others are going to be able to fight the laws of nature and create remarkable things for themselves. How extraordinary. And it's all in our power. And God wants it. He wants the individuality. He wants the courage. He wants the decision making. And he says, the more you challenge life, the more I bless your efforts. The more you think independently within this fantastic universe that Torah knowledge provides, the more I embrace you and bless your efforts. So this brings the next question then. We had the last couple weeks in the parasha, in the weekly reading, we had this unusual situation, and I'm sure you talked about it, where God limits Pharaoh's ability to make a decision. Right? Classic, I'm sure you've talked about it. Ve'hazek Hashem et lev Paro, and God hardens Paro's heart. He precludes the Egyptian monarch from looking at all the options, from considering every possibility. What do you mean? Didn't we just talk about that the tree had made his own decision, and the grasses had the ability to shape themselves, and man has this unique ability, even greater than anything else, to make decisions, to make choices? Didn't you just tell me that? So Maimonides speaks to this again, as well as the other commentators, and says, but if a person moves himself in a certain direction, again and again and again, and starts to color his world a certain way, he or she themselves start to limit their ability to make choices, shut down their possibilities of challenging life. And after a point, God just says, not only am I not giving this person my direct individual attention, but I'm going to reinforce his lousy direction. And the path that a person takes, that's where God takes him. And Maimonides speaks to it, we're just going to go 5 more minutes. Maimonides speaks to it in the laws of Teshuvah, where he says, the shut l'chol adam netuna, that every person has the ability, the choice, is given to him. Im ratzah, should he choose, lahatot atzmo lederech tova, v'liyot tzaddik, harashut biyado. If a person decides to lean in the right direction, what do you mean lean in the right direction? What are you talking about? Rambam is not a philosopher, doesn't talk in colored terminology. He's a rationalist, hardcore, halakha, Jewish law. What do you mean? He says if a person leans in a certain direction, in a direction of good, because he wants to be righteous, he has the choice. And if a person leans himself in a different direction, and he wants to be other than righteous, well, he has that choice too. So let's look at the language for a minute. Reshut, l'chol adam. It's the purview. It's the opportunity of each person. Nituna was given to him. You have a lot of words here. a lot of extra words to shout this point very strongly. That man has this special dispensation, that if he leans in a certain direction, just leans in a certain direction, hangs out in certain places, frequents with certain people, engages certain things rather than others, things start to pick up and move for that person and multiply exponentially. So if a person comes to a class on a Tuesday night, let's say, and picks up the book afterwards, again, English, Hebrew, any language you want, or takes notes and reviews them, or stays for the extra activity, or comes back again on Wednesday, or comes back again on Shabbat, a person leans in a certain direction, starts to connect himself or herself to certain things. Nobody jumped into the water yet. Nobody made wholesale changes. I'm just moving. I'm just leaning. I'm using my free choice to shape myself in a courageous way. What happens? Everything moves in the direction of that person. Everything moves to the positive. There's a tingling inside. There's a twinkling of something. There's a feeling that people didn't feel before. A lot of the faces in this room I've seen here for a number of weeks, and I haven't been here for every week. I'm thrilled. There's something here that you all sense is very valuable and precious, and that will enrich your life unconditionally and forever. You're right. It's true. You're just starting. You're just moving. You're just growing. So here's the way it works. God built into the creative process an absolute, unequivocal free choice. To the point where everything in a person's life can be pushing him or her in a certain direction, but he or she wakes up in the morning and says, Hayom Harat Olam. It's a new day. I'm going in a different direction. And my friends are all here, or my family might be there, but I'm out. And I want something more. And I smell something. I taste something. I touched it in the walls, for example, of this wonderful little building on East 7th Street Avenue S. I touched it. I can feel something. I want it. I'm hungry. I feel a drop happier. I feel a drop more connected to life. I want to cry a little more often, not because I'm unhappy, because I'm more sensitized. That's what we're talking about here. It's about that kind of vulnerability that enables a person to make choices that draw them back to the most important element of creation and the most important reason to be an individual, to be a person who has courage, to really be a part of building creation, because you're building yourself. So, when a person is on this track, God helps himself. We've seen it. We've all felt it. When a person is not, God sort of takes a step back and says, what can I do? You know, it's like I taught as a volunteer in one of the high schools here in Brooklyn for about 10 years. And they gave me the 405 boys class, senior boys in high school. So these boys were in the bottom class, and it was a senior year, and it was a Friday morning. So who really cares? So the Torah teacher who had the class called me up one day and said, Ricky, I'm doing nothing here. This is a complete waste of time for me and for them. What do you say? Would you come in and give it a shot? So came in, we changed things up completely, and gave these young men the opportunity to to make choices and to build spectacular lives. So the thing was meant to be a 2 or 3 month thing, went the whole year, and then continued for another 10 or 12 years after that. Same group, kids who had fallen off the chart. Senior boys, Friday morning, nobody cares, sweat hard, bottom class. Some of those guys are the leaders of the Syrian community today, literally. The chairman of the board of the Sephardic Community Center, right next door, is a kid I had in my class. When I went into the classroom, the teacher told me, Ricky, don't waste time. Leave him alone. He sat in the corner. That's all I had to hear from the teacher, was don't waste time. Leave him alone. There's nothing you can do here. So that he became one of the people I invested most. He grew. He made these choices. He cried. He dreamed. He dreamt. He went to Israel for the year. He got into Yeshiva University. He went to graduate school. This was the kid who was at the bottom of the bottom class. But something touched him. Something inspired him. Something gave him the courage. And today, he's the chairman of the board of one of the most important institutions in the Syrian community. Spectacular. Unprecedented. But you know what? No one else, well, it's not true, it's not unprecedented. The truth is it's not. A lot of guys, from those 10 years or 12 years of the program we did, are doing extraordinary and great things in their lives. Because they went back to the core of who they are. They made choices. So what I wish for you, as we meet every so often, every week or two, and we lay down the fundamentals in Judaism. We talked about creation. We talked about some of the core characteristics and defining phrases and terms and ways of living. We talked today about this, about choices. We talked last time about Moadim, about moments in time, meeting places in time, and how a person can grow and build his life from them significantly. And today, we're talking about the cornerstone of human existence and the cornerstone of Jewish existence, and that is knowledgeable choices. Learn and choose. Amass knowledge and choose. And keep challenging life. And cry sometimes and be afraid. I'm sure the grass was a little scared that God would punish them for being courageous enough to individualize themselves. But that's what it's about. And that's what Torah is about. And there's no better tool to find your identity than the components that Judaism offers. There is no better tool. Whether it be Shabbat, or a holiday, or learning, or what you're doing here. It's all this spectacular, unparalleled ecosystem that allows us to reach things in our lives that nothing else provides. I wish that for all of you. Quick questions? No? Good? Yeah? Thank you all very much.
Alright guys, at this point let's try to do this without my help. Everyone find your group members, get in your sections, figure it out. Alright, try again within 2 minutes. Ricky, or Mike, stay behind for a few minutes. Go check out one of the groups.
Watch a couple minutes.
Yeah, he's gonna